He sat behind the wheel of a rusted old truck, weathered hands resting steady on the steering wheel, eyes calm beneath the shadow of a sun-faded cap. At first glance, he looked like just another elderly man pulled over on the side of a forgotten road. No plates, no Bluetooth, no rush. But if you look in closer, if you truly saw him, you'd notice the quiet strength in his posture, the kind of silence earned in places maps don't mark and memories don't forget. His name was Thomas Redden, 83, steady, unseen. And when two young officers mistook him for a nobody, they had no idea they had just laid hands on a man who once carried the wounded out of minefields, who built the very missions others claimed as glory, who saved lives in the dead of night and never once asked to be thanked for it. This is not a story about a traffic stop. This is a story about a nation forgetting and then remembering what real service looks like. And the man who, even in silence, never stopped serving. License? Registration? Or just a good excuse, old man? The rookie officer let out a laugh as he casually tapped the hood of the truck, dented, sun-bleached, and holding on to its last bits of rust with the same quiet stubbornness as the man behind the wheel. Thomas Redden didn't flinch, didn't blink. His gaze didn't shift, didn't challenge. Both hands stayed at 10 and 2 on the wheel, steady, sunburned, weathered hands, the kind that knew how to build, to break, to fix what most folks had long given up on. He sat still, wrapped in silence so thick it settled like dust on everything around him. And then, minutes later, not many, but enough for curiosity to build in those watching from porches and passing cars, a sleek black SUV rolled up with the smoothness of authority. A four-star general climbed out without a single flourish. No salute, no barked orders. Just 6 calm words, heavier than any citation. That man built the team that saved me. If that line struck something deep, good. It should, because for every soldier like Thomas, still walking among us, steady and unseen, there are thousands more whose stories were never told. And if respect doesn't come before regret, then shame on us for needing reminders like this. Share it. Someone out there needs to understand what honor looks like when it's not wearing a uniform anymore. Thomas Redden wasn't in a rush that morning. He never was. At 83, his pace was deliberate, not sluggish. The world had been fast enough for him already. Too fast. He'd seen days flash by in gunfire and helicopter blades in midnight extractions and sandstorms. So now he moved through life at a speed he chose, not one the world demanded. That morning, like most, had started simple. A trip to the local lumber yard, the kind of errand neighbors had come to expect from him. A widow just down the street, Mrs. Balkins, had a front step that was starting to rot through. Thomas said he'd get to it before the rain came. No charge, no fuss. The clerk, young enough to be his grandson, had offered to load the pressure-treated wood into the truck bed. But Thomas just gave him a quiet nod and a wave of the hand. He'd built this truck himself, back before most of the town had even been born. The engine coughed like an old smoker every time it turned over. The radio was long dead, tags eaten clean by rust, paint faded into something between sage and ghost. But it ran. It ran because Thomas knew every hose, every bolt, every stubborn gear in its frame. Bluetooth? Didn't matter. What he needed was motion and quiet. He wore a jacket that had been with him through deserts, through jungle canopies and alpine blizzards. Now it mostly saw grocery aisles and hardware store counters. On its left shoulder, nearly threadbare, was the faint outline of a patch, Airborne Division. Not many noticed it anymore. Fewer even recognized what it meant. But Thomas didn't mind. He didn't want attention. He wanted purpose. And so, with the wood secure in the back and gravel crunching beneath worn tires, he turned down the side road toward home. The truck groaned with every dip and bump, the sun striking the cracked windshield just so. That was when the lights appeared, a flicker of red and blue flashing in his rear view. No panic, no curse, just a steady breath, a practiced hand shifting into park, and his fingers returning to the wheel. 2 hands visible. Old habit, old training. This wasn't the first time someone had looked at him and seen nothing more than an old man in a rust bucket, but something about today felt different. Like maybe, finally, it might be the last time they got away with it. The squad car door opened too quickly, betraying the nerves behind the badge. A young officer, barely more than a boy, maybe 24, strode over with rookie energy, all posture and bravado. His partner followed slower, steadier, maybe 5 years older, but wearing the same brand of certainty, the kind that comes from lessons not yet learned. The younger officer walked to the driver's side and rapped the window twice with the back of his knuckle. "Roll it down, sir." Thomas obliged. Slowly, deliberate. The window groaned louder than the engine had. The officer leaned in, giving the cab a once-over with a smirk. "No plates, no tags? This thing even insured?" Thomas didn't answer right away. No smart remark, no anger, just calm. He reached across the seat, opened the glove box, and pulled out an envelope. Old, frayed at the edges, the seal worn half off. He handed it over without a word. The officer opened it and scoffed. "Historical vehicle registration? This expired 3 years ago." His partner stepped in now, nodding toward the lumber in the back. "What's all this? Planning to build something? Or tear something down?" Thomas's voice came low, rough, like gravel underfoot. "Replacing a broken step for Mrs. Balkins." The officers exchanged a glance. The younger one raised a brow. "Cute, you got ID on you, sir?" Thomas reached into his coat, pulled out a worn leather wallet, the kind that had long since conformed to the curve of his back pocket. Inside, a driver's license, an Army ID, edges softened by time, in a single photo so faded the figures were little more than ghostly outlines. The young officer plucked the photo out. "What is this? Your poker group?" Thomas looked at him, a long, unreadable gaze. Said nothing. "All right, out of the vehicle, please. Hands where I can see them." Thomas stepped out, no protest, just that steady breath again. His boots hit the gravel softly, deliberately. "You're not carrying anything sharp, are you?" the officer asked, almost too casual. "Only thing sharp left is my mind," Thomas replied. They patted him down. One of them smirked. "Sir, we're going to need you to sit on the curb while we sort this out." Thomas lowered himself slowly, a quiet grunt escaping as his knees reminded him of decades past. Jumps, marches, burdens. Things these two would never understand. The officers returned to the truck. One began removing tools, a hammer, a drill, a neatly wrapped set of hinges. The other opened the passenger door and rifled through the glove box again. "That your notebook?" he asked, pulling out a battered green military logbook. Inside, names. Dozens of them, some marked with stars, some crossed out. "What is this?" he joked. "A kill list?" Thomas said nothing. Just watched the wind kick up a spiral of dust along the road. The silence grew heavier, more disrespectful than anything else in that moment. They'd made him sit on concrete, midday sun beating down. His knees burned through denim that hadn't seen a wash in a week. Gravel dug into his palms every time he adjusted, but he didn't complain, didn't ask for anything. The young officer leaned against the truck's hood, sipping from a fast food cup like it was just another boring stop. His partner tapped away on a tablet, squinting at DMV records like they were encrypted in Latin. Cars started to slow down. Some drivers looked, some didn't. One teenager on a bike circled back, phone held high like he was filming some rare zoo exhibit. "Yo, Grandpa got arrested," the kid laughed, recording from across the street. The clip hit social media in seconds, captioned, "Vietnam Grandpa versus Police." A big fat L for the old guy. Thomas didn't flinch, didn't react, just kept his eyes forward, past the patrol car, past the street light, past the ignorance. The younger officer crouched beside him with a smug tilt to his voice. "You all right, sir? You seem kind of out of it." Still, Thomas said nothing. Couldn't tell if they thought he was deaf, senile, or just slow, maybe both. They didn't notice the tension in his jaw. They didn't notice how his fingers rested calm and still on his thigh. The same way they once did on the safety of an M4, waiting for green light under moonless skies. They didn't see the discipline, the control, the years. They just saw a flannel shirt, a busted truck, and silence. That was their mistake. One of the officers opened the driver's door, reached under the seat, and pulled out a few more items: a folded road map, a pair of gloves, and one more thing, a laminated military ID, old, dog-eared, but carefully preserved. The name on it, Sergeant Major Thomas Redden. Thomas gave a slow, measured nod. The officer chuckled under his breath, amused. Well, even if you were in the military, sir, that doesn't make you above the law. His tone dripped with smugness as he casually tossed Thomas's ID onto the seat as if it were a cheap coupon someone had handed him at a gas station. Thomas said nothing. Not because he was intimidated, he wasn't, but because he had lived through this before. He recognized the pattern. Young men full of swagger, puffed up by the authority of a badge, blind to the ground they were basking on. They had no idea. Across the street, a man in a gray work shirt stepped out from the gas station. He squinted into the sun, his gaze settling directly on Thomas. No words, no wave, just recognition. His hand went into his pocket, pulled out his phone. A quiet, purposeful motion. It's Mike. Yeah, I need to report something. No, not a crime, a mistake, a serious one. He paused, watching the scene from the curb. They've got Tom Redden sitting on the sidewalk, hands folded in his lap like he's no one. Another pause. You're gonna want to come down here, right now. Mike ended the call and remained standing just outside the station door. He didn't need to check who he dialed. Whoever answered would know exactly who Thomas Redden was. They'd remember. Mike Henderson hadn't worn a uniform in years. He was no longer in the military. But some things don't fade. You don't forget the man who pulled you from a burning convoy under enemy fire in Kandahar. You don't forget someone who tied off your bleeding arm while rounds zipped overhead. Mike had only seen Sergeant Major Redden a handful of times since the war, mostly at quiet veterans of foreign wars gatherings. Tom never said much. He'd listen, offer a silent nod, stay behind after meetings to help fold chairs. But anyone who ever served with him remembered. You always remembered. Now, through the dust-streaked window of the comm station, Mike watched that same man, his rescuer, his commander, being treated like a suspect, like some kind of criminal. He couldn't stay inside. He stepped out and made the call that would change everything. A few miles away, behind layers of reinforced concrete and multiple rings of clearance-only checkpoints, a phone rang inside a classified command center. It was a private line, unlisted. General Nathaniel Lawson, a four-star decorated veteran, was reviewing satellite briefings when an aide brought him the receiver. It's a civilian, sir. Says it's urgent, about a Sergeant Major Thomas Redden. The general froze. His eyes lifted from the paper. He took the phone with deliberate calm. Where? Mike's voice came through steady and certain. Corner of 8th and Millwood. 2 local officers. They've got him sitting there on the sidewalk like he's some stray. They don't know who he is, sir. A long, quiet beat. You're absolutely sure? No question. I'd know him anywhere. Another pause. I'll be there within the hour. Back at the curb, nothing had changed in the eyes of the officers. If anything, they were growing impatient. The search had turned up nothing. No drugs, no weapons, no warrants. Just an elderly man, a logbook filled with names, a beat-up truck, some hardware store supplies in the bed. The younger officer tapped irritably on his tablet screen. Still says vehicle not registered. Then write him up, his partner said, more annoyed than concerned. 3 citations? Yeah, let him take it to court. They approached Thomas again, clipboards in hand, pens at the ready, like they were handing out parking tickets. One crouched beside him. Sir, we're citing you for expired registration, unsafe vehicle condition, and missing plates. Thomas looked up, his face unreadable, his eyes calm. He didn't reach for the papers, didn't argue, didn't blink. He just stared. One of the officers muttered quietly, just loud enough, bet he still thinks he's some kind of war hero. Thomas didn't respond. But in his mind, the past stirred, mud-slicked boots in Panama, breath fogging and freezing pre-dawn extractions over the Balkan ranges, ropes cutting into his shoulders as he climbed with 50 pounds of gear across enemy zones. He knew what real disrespect looked like. This was just static, an annoyance, something that would pass. Across the street, Mike stood like a statue beside the gas station door, watching his watch. 51 minutes. That's what he figured it would take. He knew what was coming. And when it came, no one here would forget it. Not the sound, not the sight, not the weight of it. The street was quiet now. Heavy heat hung in the summer air, punctuated by the low hum of the cruiser's engine. The younger cop leaned lazily against Thomas's truck, legs crossed at the ankle, thumbing a message into his phone. His partner was in the car, AC running, radio murmuring indistinct updates about traffic and routine checks. Nothing, not a word, about who they were actually dealing with. Thomas didn't move. He remained still, planted. His cap shaded his eyes, but the rigid set of his spine hadn't changed. He could wait. He had waited before. 72 hours once, submerged in a riverbed deep in the jungle, waiting on recon to pull him out. This was nothing. Mike checked his watch again. 9 minutes left. He didn't speak, just stood, patient. At exactly the 59th minute, the silence was broken. Not by sirens or shouting, but by a sound as certain as approaching thunder. Tires gripped pavement with authority. No lights, no flashing signals, just intent. A matte black SUV rolled around the corner. Government plates, tinted windows, every detail meticulous. It didn't slow. It didn't waver. It pulled directly behind the patrol car and stopped, precise as a chess move. Both officers turned, puzzled. The younger one frowned. What the hell is that? FBI? Could be, his partner said, straightening his stance. Maybe a federal transfer. But Mike already knew. Before the doors opened, before the air changed, he knew. Thomas didn't shift, didn't react, even as the back passenger door opened and from the shadows stepped General Nathaniel Lawson. Full-dress uniform, all 4 stars, cap tucked under one arm, his gaze like sharpened steel. He didn't look at the officers. He looked directly at Thomas Redden. Thomas lifted his chin just slightly. The small crowd that had slowly gathered on the periphery of the scene hushed. Phones froze mid-scroll. Some people started filming. Others just stood, silent and unsure why the moment suddenly felt different. The younger officer stepped forward. Sir, is there a problem? General Lawson didn't answer right away. He turned to face them fully, posture perfect, rows of ribbons catching the light. Then he spoke. Which one of you stopped this man? Neither officer answered. A beat passed. He stepped closer. Do you even know who he is? They looked at each other confused, shrinking under the sudden gravity in his tone. Lawson didn't wait. That man, he said, voice unwavering, saved my life in 1984. He led a night extraction through enemy terrain and brought 6 of us back from what command had already written off as a lost cause. His voice cut through the heat like wind across stone. He trained the senior reconnaissance leaders your government has trusted for over 30 years. Now he turned fully towards them. You didn't just stop an old truck. You disrespected one of the finest soldiers this country has ever produced. The words fell heavy, undeniable, like iron on the concrete. Even the sun seemed to burn less brightly in the silence that followed. And for the first time that afternoon, the 2 officers were speechless. But Lawson wasn't finished. He pivoted toward the growing crowd, toward the bystanders, the phones, the officers, the quiet bystanders clinging to curiosity and discomfort. His voice didn't rise, but it reached every ear on the block. This man served in 7 countries most of you couldn't even point to on a map. He's jumped out of planes into whiteout blizzards. He's crawled through minefields to drag out wounded men. He'd led missions you'll only read about 5 decades from now if they ever get declassified. And that rusted-out truck sitting there on the side of the road, it wasn't just some junker. That truck was a piece of American history. Back during Hurricane Andrew, it was loaded with medical supplies and driven straight through 5 feet of rising floodwater by none other than Sergeant Major Thomas Redden himself to reach families left stranded when no one else dared to try. The crowd shifted as if stirred by memory. A woman standing by the gas station stepped forward, voice trembling with quiet certainty. I know him. He built my father a wheelchair ramp after his stroke. Wouldn't take a single cent. Another voice rose from across the street. He brings groceries to the senior center every week. Rain, snow, it doesn't matter. He always shows. A man wearing mechanic's overalls moved closer. Taught my son's scout troop survival skills last summer, he said, emotion catching in his throat. First time I ever saw my boy actually listen to someone. People weren't just watching anymore. They were remembering. Officer Brian Keller, the rookie, took an uncertain step back, his face flushed with shame. His partner, now clearly rattled, cleared his throat and muttered, "Sir, we didn't know." General Nathaniel Lawson's gaze sharpened like a blade. "That's the problem," he said coldly. "You didn't ask." Then he turned his full attention toward Thomas, who still hadn't spoken, still hadn't stood. "Permission to help you up, Sergeant Major?" the general asked. Thomas shifted, placed both hands on the curb, and rose slowly. His movement wasn't fast, but it was firm, steady even. "Permission granted," he said in a quiet voice. And then he stood tall, his back straight, shoulders square, cap pulled low over his brow. The general lifted his hand in salute. Thomas returned it slowly, deliberately, the kind of salute that says more than any speech ever could. The crowd went silent. Even the children knew not to speak in that moment. And then Thomas broke his silence. He turned calmly to the officers. "Don't apologize to me," he said, his voice gentle, almost fatherly. "Apologize to the next old man, before you assume he's no one." There was no bitterness in his tone, no desire to wound, just the quiet understanding of someone who's seen what assumptions cost. And that was when they all saw it. This wasn't a man clinging to the past. This was someone who had helped shape the future, and who even now was still holding it up with quiet strength, one act of kindness at a time. Officer Keller lowered his sunglasses. His eyes were full of regret. Shame pressed hard against his face. He looked like he wished he could melt into the gravel beneath his boots. I'm sorry, sir," he stammered. "I truly didn't know." Thomas gave him a faint nod. Not angry, not smug, just tired. "That's the point, son," he said. "You never know who someone is just by looking at them. That's why respect should come first, not last." The general stepped in again and opened a worn brown leather folder, embossed with a government seal. "This," he said, "is Sergeant Major Redden's unclassified service record." He held it up for all to see. 3 bronze stars, 2 purple hearts, operations director for classified missions across 3 continents. His extraction protocol is still taught in Special Forces schools today. He handed the folder to the senior officer, who accepted it with trembling hands. "Before your shift ends, I suggest you read every page, word for word." But General Lawson wasn't done. He pointed at the battered Chevy truck. "That vehicle is registered as a historical artifact under a federal military exemption. The paperwork is updated annually, on file with your department." He let the silence hang. "Next time," he added, "check before you humiliate someone." The very next morning, the sheriff's department released a public statement. No excuses, no spin, no cover-up, just a raw admission of truth. A mistake made from ignorance, and a moment that changed the department forever. Within a week, the town voted unanimously to declare June 12th as Thomas Redden Day. Photos from that afternoon made national headlines. One photo in particular, General Lawson saluting, Thomas standing tall as he returned it, graced the cover of Military Honor Weekly. A local fundraiser was launched, dubbed the Redden Initiative. Its mission was clear: to build access ramps for disabled veterans across the entire state. In just the first week, donations surged past $186,000. Thomas quietly directed every penny to a list he'd been compiling for years. Veterans who couldn't leave their homes because of crumbling stairs, busted porches, or uneven paths. But the ripple didn't stop there. Brian Keller, the rookie officer who had once disrespected him, didn't vanish after his apology. He began showing up at the VFW on Saturdays. At first, the old vets wouldn't even look at him, they remembered. But Thomas did something no one expected. He poured the young man a hot cup of coffee and said simply, "You learn, or someone else pays next time." Over time, Brian became a familiar face. He helped fix the VFW's leaky roof, drove seniors to medical appointments, even started bringing new recruits from the police academy with him. And the sheriff? He launched a new mandatory training course. They called it Recognition and Respect, Veterans in Our Community. The first speaker was Thomas Redden. He only spoke 11 words. Service doesn't end with the uniform. Neither should the respect for it. 3 months later, General Lawson returned, this time with no SUV, no uniform. Just an old button-down and a friend in the passenger seat. He and Thomas sat quietly on the porch of Thomas's modest home, the kind of house you might drive past without even noticing. They shared a bottle of good whiskey while watching fireflies blink through the warm dusk. "You turned it around, Tom," the general said softly. Thomas shook his head. They turned it around. All they needed was a mirror. The truck still ran, still rattled down Main Street every morning. Sometimes it carried lumber, other days tools. On Tuesdays, a flag flapped from the back. It rolled past the gas station, the bakery, the square. But now people didn't just glance at it. They paused. They stood straighter. One day, a little girl saluted. Her father quickly followed. And maybe the most remarkable change? Police cruisers didn't stop him anymore. They pulled over to salute. At the police academy, every new recruit now receives a laminated card in their welcome folder. It says just 6 words: "You never know who you're stopping." Beside those words are 2 photos, one of Thomas Redden sitting quietly on a sidewalk, and another, moments later, of a 4-star general standing beside him, head bowed in reverence. The Redden Initiative is now a full statewide program. In less than a year, it's built more than 340 ramps for disabled veterans. Thomas never appeared on the news. He never gave interviews. He just kept showing up, toolbox in hand, ready to measure, saw, drill. Because to him, respect wasn't something you talked about. It was something you did. One screw, one step, one porch at a time. And on the day a Vietnam veteran passed without any family left to carry him to rest, it was Thomas who arrived early, drove the casket himself in the same truck those officers once mocked. At the cemetery, 2 police cruisers followed behind, not to issue tickets, but to escort him. Some men leave legacies in textbooks. Others leave them in the hearts of those who witnessed them carry the weight of a nation without ever asking for thanks. Thomas Redden never needed a salute, but now, every time he drives by, he gets one.